All right, let's start fresh. So you were telling me, yeah, you were having trouble sleeping since you were a kid,
Yes.
and then someone told you about the show.
Yes, and it was the first thing in my life. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this before, and I would love to hear the stories of what people say about Sleep With Me that actually, worked its magic on my psyche and was able to help me. And I'm curious. I want to zoom out first and hear a little bit about why you started this podcast and maybe the ways that you personally have dealt with insomnia or sleep struggles.
It's funny because of the way stuff comes together, right? Because we were trying to figure out the time, and I have dyslexia, and I'm also very cognizant of time. And so we missed each other once, like last month, I
Yeah.
think. And then today I was like, wait a second, what time, what time are we meeting at or whatever? And the reason that's important is because when I was in school as a kid, I had undiagnosed like dyslexia and some other stuff. And it was because I'd already become such a difficult kind of kid with the teachers that they were like, "Oh, it's just you don't have anything wrong with you other than your behavior. Like you're just one of those kids that just you don't want to do the work and you don't want to like get along with the teachers. You don't want to follow the rules." And for me, like inside, I was like, I know there's something wrong with me because I just can't do this stuff, and it's not like I want to be bad. And it caused me not to be able to sleep because I'd be so afraid of going to school the next day. What was going to happen? I would spend like a lot of time trying to predict everything that was going to happen at school and be like, okay, can I be prepared for anything? Or, fantasize that I wouldn't have to go to school or whatever. And then it became like, well, now I need to sleep because I'm so tired. Now I can't think about, well, now when I think about how I'm going to fall asleep, I can't force myself to fall asleep. And what does that even mean? And that cycle started and it was so painful. I mean, like you're kind of talking about too, and in a way you can't quite put into words. Like it hurts in a way that's like hard to explain. And I even shared a room with my brother, but it was so lonely. Like I felt so lonely too. And I had adults in my life that wanted to help, and I would tell them like, "Hey, this is what's happening," and they'd be like, oh, "Okay, well, just try not to think about school." Or try to think about something nice or try this and it wasn't intentional but it was like it felt so dismissive and more isolating to hear we just got to do you're not doing it the right way and it's like
So
I don't know what else.
invalidating.
Yeah. And so I was in this really bad place and then I was similar to your experience but in a different way. I was on the playground and this other kid was talking about his older brother listened to comedy on the radio that was on late at night. And I was like, wait a second, what? And he's like, oh, well, you could listen to it on the radio. And you could do this comedy and all these funny shows. And I was like, huh, I'm going to check that out. And that for me became like a place I could escape to when I couldn't sleep, and that distracted me, and that made me feel like a part of something. And it kind of felt, I mean, I wasn't supposed to be doing it, so it kind of felt good in that way. Like, and it never. Sometimes I'd fall asleep incidentally, just because I was so distracted. But it really just like took my mind off of this horrific cycle and gave me this place that I felt like, okay, because I was not paying attention to myself and I was listening to something funny. And I never forgot those 2 things, like the relief the comedy radio brought me and the pain of not being able to sleep. And that's like really like where the show ended up coming from, even though it's like a long gap in between we could talk about. But like, yeah, that's really the genesis of the podcast and my sleeplessness too.
Sabribri in the chat says, try not to think about it is such a frustrating thing to hear. And that was my experience too. So I'm a social worker on top of being an animator. And one of the biggest tenets of social work is to validate. When people come in and they're telling you what's going on, validation is like one of the key, I would say, top three things when you're listening to someone going through something. Because Otherwise, all the listening that you're doing doesn't really feel like listening to the person that's going through something. But from like from our parents or my friends or the people in all of our lives. Earlier, I don't know if you were here. I asked our audience how many of you struggle with sleep, and the chat was flying with ones. Like this is a struggle so many of us have, and yet when we bounce it off of our loved ones, and they probably mean well, like you're saying. Oh well, did you try to, I don't know, have some warm milk and a little thing of oatmeal? It's not exactly okay. I don't think you understand the words you're saying is like isolation and that loneliness. It almost felt for me growing up like when I would go through these bouts of insomnia, and I had my last one when I reached out to you. So it was like a couple months ago. Uh, it feels like I'm out of the world. It's really hard to put to words because it's not just about the experience of being awake late at night. It's like the lack of control and then the questioning of yourself. And why can't I get to sleep? And then you start thinking about how important sleep is. And well, I have so many things I'm going to do tomorrow. And if I don't get to sleep, how am I going to do this? I'm going to be tired when I talk to my wife. I'm not going to be present when I do this. And it can be so easy to spiral into despair. And you
Yeah.
wake up the next day and people are like, "Oh, how'd you sleep? Not that great." They don't That doesn't even begin to describe like the horrors that go on in our heads. But what I love about your podcast is that it, instead of living in this untethered to the world nightmare, I've got a metronome. With your voice and your work. It's like I have a there I have a tether. I have a tether somewhere. And I want to get into that, but talk me through. So you've had this experience throughout your life, and then you mentioned it was many years in between. What was sort of the inciting incident for you to actually record that first podcast?
So hopefully this is relatable to you and anybody else listening or helpful. So it was a little bit of a long. I'll try to
No,
try not
please
to make it
you
into
go
a podcast
ahead.
episode, but so I've always been a person since I was a kid in my room. Not only was that there all that pain, I was like a daydreamer, and I loved reading, and I loved watching things and playing with toys. Like I probably played with toys way longer than
Dude,
most of
me
my
too.
peers.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Right. And so, and I fantasized about what I was going to be when I grow up. And even that was kind of for most adults was like, what? I don't know. And then I kind of lost my way. And I mean, for me, it was like, some of it was mental health. Some of it was like not having tools like a lot of people have. Oh, one day I'm going to grow. Like one day I'll be an adult. One day I'll do this, or one day I'll figure this out, or it'll be a better time to be creative later. And that was also for me. I had to get sober. I had problems with like alcohol and other substances, but through that journey, it was like I just kept putting my life off, like and thinking, "Hey, I'm going to live my life at some point down the road. I'll get it together, and then I'll be fine." And what happened was the first thing that happened was I had a child. Like I had a daughter, and when she was real little, I had this moment, and I wasn't sober at this point or anything, but like I was holding her and thinking about like raising her into a strong woman or whatever. And then I was like, this is how our minds work, right? Like I imagined her at like as a young adult being like, wait a second, you've been giving me all this advice that I could do whatever I wanted with my life, and you don't even believe it. Like you've never even tried. And there was something about that it just cracked a little bit of that where I started taking a couple classes at a community college, and I started getting a little bit better at following through on at least trying. It's all it really takes. I found is like, hey, just let's put in some effort and start to develop that part of you, the creative part of me. And then at some point, years before I started the podcast, I had the idea for it, kind of based on my childhood experiences, and then just like the ability to tell these rambling stories on like camping trips and stuff like that to put people to sleep. And I put it off for years because my brain was like, "Well, that's a dumb idea. That's so dumb. You don't know how to make a podcast. It's like the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Who would listen to that?" But it was one of those creative ideas that I would repress it or whatever, and then it would pop back up, and it'd be like, "Hey, what about this? Like, you could do it with Game of Thrones." What? No, that's like no way. Too embarrassing. No point. And it just persisted, And then it just happened to be that I had some stuff I was trying that ended up failing, and I like happened to like be like at the end of my like career of escaping through substances, and like right around there, I was just like, hey, why don't you try to make this podcast and just see how it goes? Like, you got really nothing to lose. Like, no one's if no one's going to listen to it, then what's so bad about starting it? Like, and so I just was like, it just was like a crack, and I was like, oh, let me go through this crack and just start making it, not think too much about it, and start putting it out. And so I snuck past the guards or whatever that are in my head, and then I
Yeah.
just started making it and trying it from there.
What an awesome metaphor, sneaking past the guards. I think a lot of us feel, and I actually got choked up when you were talking. It's the first time that's ever happened, speaking to someone in one of these interviews, because the feeling of, I don't have a daughter, but I'm newly married. I'm a few years in to a marriage of just about. And I too struggle with addiction. And it's when I had someone to be responsible, to hold myself accountable for, it really changes the ways that in social work and in mental health, we can idealize and ideate about all the things that are right to do. And it's wonderful. And logically, we can understand I want to make these moves and do this thing. But then at the end of the day, there can be aspects of us in chat. If you want to let us know if this is relatable, you could put a one in the chat. Um, at the end of the day, sometimes we're not living the truth of what we're speaking. And when you're talking about your daughter, I was thinking about my wife and the ways that yeah, like she is sort of my North Star in that, to want to live the ways that I'm speaking, and to use people like that in our lives, not use, but to have the luxury and the gratefulness of people in our lives that can propel us into sort of clearer waters, I think is just one of the great agents of change that any of us can ask to have. Chad, I want to remind you guys too that if you use the channel point redeem called question, I will get that your questions asked to Drew by the end of the interview. But so you recorded your first podcast, but before we get there, actually, I wanted to hold on this metaphor of sneaking past the guards in your head. Can you dive into a little bit more about what you mean by that? Because I think that's deeply relatable.
Yeah, it's like even the name Dearest Scooter, like, is a pretty good example of that. So I had, like, figured out, oh, I had got a general idea of what it would take to start a podcast on my own, and oh, okay, I had some ideas, and I was getting ready to record it and figure out how to release it. And then and I had like a full-time job kind of, and my job was pretty open-minded. Like, I worked at a library, so it was like, it wasn't like, but people didn't know I was different at my job, but I was still like, oh god, I can't put this out like under my name. And I was like, and this again kind of talks about like the idea of your wife as a North Star, or a community or whatever. Was like, I wasn't going to tell anybody in my life about this podcast because of those, whatever it is. It's like a, it's an illusion, but it seems so real. And so I was like, okay, at least I had skills to negotiate. So I was like, okay, so we're about to start this podcast, but we can't release it because like it's too embarrassing. Yeah, just can't do it. We just can't do it. Like, it is a bit too, like, imagine if somebody at work listens to it, they'll look at us weird and stuff. And it's like, okay, well, what if we just come up with like a pen name? Like, would that help? And it was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess so." And it's like, "Okay, then we'll just come up with a," it's like, it doesn't make a difference actually, but, it worked to trick that one. Like, so it's like, yeah, that guard was like, "Oh, okay, pen name, like, that works." And then you
Because
gotta
that
try.
guard was worried about like he was guarding your vulnerability in a way. That guard is like, hey, listen, people are going to find out if we live this dream. What if we face judgment? If we open ourselves up to vulnerability of doing what we actually want to do, we could be hurt. So the guard is like, dude, you're not going anywhere. Stay right there. As soon as you say, yeah, how about a pen name? It's like, oh, yeah, all right. And then you got past him. That's such a wonderful metaphor. And I think it's like just scratching the surface of the way that you use imagery in even the stories that you tell on the Sleep With Me podcast. So you record the first one, and I'm curious if you could tell us how it went. And Lala Carpe Diem, thank you so much for the raid. We're here with the host of Sleep With Me, the creator of the Sleep With Me podcast. If you're struggling with sleep, please stick around. Lala and all the raiders coming in, thank you so much for being here. We've got giveaways to help you sleep at the end of the interview. Thank you very much. What was my question there? Sorry, we just got 88 viewers popping in about that first podcast. So now, do you are you close enough with this memory to talk about what it felt like to become vulnerable and do something that you had been wanting to do?
Yeah, I think, um, I don't know the initial thing, but it kinda brings up this guard metaphor again because there was other guards I had to deal with, and then again, it wasn't the first thing I tried, and I like to remind people, it's like I had tried a couple other creative things that I kind of followed through on, and they kinda didn't work out, but that had kinda helped, like, become some of the raw material. And one of the things I learned is like, that of these expectations these guards have or whatever is in my head, the critic or whatever you wanna call it, like, and I had done enough research because I mean, I guess the flip side of some of these character challenges is that they can actually become assets, and so it's like, okay, I did a lot of research on, like, and the one stat that stuck with me about podcasting or creating stuff, if you have no audience or whatever, is like that most if someone starts a podcast, at least when I started, it was like 50% of people never make episode two. And then out of those people that make episode two episodes, 50% of people don't make episode eight. And then after episode eight, 50% of those people don't make episode 21. And then after 21, like 50 more percent of people drop off. I don't even know. I was like 50. So I set those instead of like giving the power over to this parts of me that I knew were going to shut it down. I was like, okay, can we just make one episode? And then can we just make two episodes? Then can we make eight episodes, 21 and 50? And in between those, can you please let me just work on the podcast? And then at 21, you could destroy me, right? You could just crush my dreams and we'll go over it and you could be like, this is pointless and embarrassing and a failure. And then we could stop at 21. But between 8 and 21, I'm not stopping. Just so you know, like I'm going to do that. And it was like, and again, it shows I guess there's a term like paper dragon or paper tiger or something. It's like when I got to 21 and I sat down like in a pretend meeting with these parts of my brain,
Wow.
like, who has the objections? And everybody just sits there quietly, like it's like okay, there's like 10 people listening to the show, and I got like one email, and it's like, so does anybody have an objection why we should stop? Right? Go ahead, speak up. It's like no, none of those parts of me are going to speak up in the moment, right? They only wanna trip me up when I'm, like, in the middle of it or I guess I'm vulnerable, but it's like, I guess in the end, it shows, like kinda like you said earlier, like, I call them brain bots on the show. They're like these old parts of us that only have one function or, like, oh, if you're talking to a therapist, be like maladjustments, I think is the term they use, but, like,
Defense mechanisms, I like to think of them as really. Like, I think all of us, in some way, shape, or form, have these guards in our head. And it's just so powerful to personify them that way because, and if we really dived into it on like a therapeutic level, there's probably reasons why those guards were worried about those specific things for you. And I'm sure, like, if we really extrapolated, if when we're hurt and we're traumatized, whether it's a big uppercase T trauma or small lowercase t traumas, these guards I find in social work, they show up to prevent that from ever happening again, to prevent criticism, to prevent us feeling like our heart's getting ripped out. And sometimes our guards can kind of bully us along the way into that. It's like some of the reflections of what I'm hearing and what you say, it's like, similar to mine. They're very critical. Well, what if everyone thinks I'm a loser? You can't really do cartoons and therapy, right? What the hell is that? You can't. These two worlds can't mix. And our inner voices, the guards speaking in our heads, will kind of say whatever they can sometimes to prevent you from opening up that wound and being susceptible to pain. So the metaphor that you're talking about of sitting down and having like negotiations with them, where do you think you learned where did you get this imaginative visual space in your head, do you think?
I mean, maybe I think like a lot of times this stuff is all an accumulation of everything I've consumed, right? As like a reader, and a viewer, and a listener and stuff. But it's also like I think for me, a lot of my journey, whether it's through the podcast or my personal life, is like becoming softer and like kind of, I guess, like to go back to what you said, like validate even those parts want to be validated, at least you're seen, even though their ideas are terrible or they're only applicable like 14 years ago, and giving them some kind of voice and sitting down or letting them be reasonable. It's only in those pauses or when it's scheduled for me. In the moment, my brain is very chaotic, and in the moment, I can believe all the stuff they're saying, and then I'm like, I'll have a perfect plan, and then it's like, "Oh, no, 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 we gotta run over here. We gotta do this. No, no, no." And it's like, just sitting down and having some space to be like, "Hey, what do you really think? Is this really a bad idea or not? I'm willing to listen to you at episode 8 and episode 21 because I know you're gonna be telling me to quit every 20 minutes between now and then, but I just wanna try, right now and see how it goes."
And isn't that an amazing thing that even part of the key to dealing with our internal guards in this metaphor is validating them too. Like to even be like, hey, listen, I understand the fear. I'll change my name, my handle. And then it validates, instead of saying like, screw you to the guard and I'm marching forward and I'm doing it anyway, then you create this internal resistance, I find. But then you sit down and you're like, hey, I understand what you're saying. You can criticize me all through the way, but if I could get to these key episode markers, then you could go to town and run wild. And I think a lot of us try to reflexively and logically fight against those guards without also validating them. You know, they're there for a reason. And they probably kept you safe at some point.
Yeah, and I guess my experience, and this is only my experience, is like they can't be destroyed. And anytime I try to go to battle with them or destroy them, or by like using substances to try, I mean,
Yeah.
that is honestly one of my motivations. Is like, can I just destroy this part of my brain, like so I don't have to deal with it anymore? And the answer is no. Like for me, it was. It's like no, these things are here. And like in the podcast, I call them brain bots. It's like, hey, come around. I'm going to tell you a story now. Like, you can keep zooming all you want, but I'm going to tell you a little story. And it's like, and it is like the same thing. It's like, hey, look over here while your human is going to like lie there and kind of listen too. But I'm really going to get your attention. Like it is a bit like, I don't perform magic, but I'm one of those people when I see a magician perform, I'm like, whoa, man, what? And I don't like, I can't figure out the tricks and I don't necessarily want to know. It's like that misdirection is what makes it feel magical, and that's kind of the idea of the podcast on one level is, like, to bring us outside of ourselves a little bit, like, as a misdirection. Just like the comedy radio, sometimes I just fall asleep because I was listening to the person doing their bits, and it made me smile, and I forgot what I was worried about, and I forgot I was trying to fall asleep, and so I fell asleep.
Exactly. And I know that you like I'm sure have talked about this in many other interviews, but you're the way that you tell these bedtime stories are they land in this what feels like it had to be studied because it's such a perfect point of landing in interesting and engaging, but then like consciously, deliberately not. And writing this line, it's like it hits my brain in a spot that keeps me perfectly captivated, but also checked out enough to, and when those two things meet, it's like perfect for this. Is that something that you've had discussions, I'm guessing many, many, many times about like the, how did you find that place? Was that conscious? Or do you feel like that's a natural part of just how this art personifies?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think there's probably a bunch of right answers, or they add to each other. But for me, I mean, I've had people ask about the show and say they're studying the show or tell me the principles behind it, and I'm like, oh, okay. But for me, it's kind of like the way I look at it is when I sit down to record, it's in this closet. Like I've only recorded most of the shows in two different closets where I've lived in two different apartments, and they're small closets. So I kind of get in there, and all of this stuff that's kind of present when we're talking, or will be present during the rest of my day. Uh, I can kind of sit down and it's like this weird context, right? It's like I'm there to talk to one listener and to be there for them. And even when I'm recording, sometimes I'll get distracted, or especially in the first few years, the critic voice or something would come in and be like, "Oh, this is terrible." And I'd be like, "Hey, listen, like right now, I'm just trying to make the best podcast I can for this person, and we're gonna edit it. And if it's not good, we'll just delete it or whatever. But I got to focus on this person right now." And I think that remembering that for me is where everything else flows out of, because it also, I mean, this is one of the cases where it's like when I'm doing it for someone else, I'm kinda doing it for myself, and it opens me up to, like, whatever's bubbling up in my head in a much more curious and calm way, because I'm like, "Oh, what's this thought that's interrupting me? Oh, interesting. Like, what do you have to say about it? Oh, okay, go ahead." And I can be a little bit more playful, than I might be during the day when I'm like,
Yeah.
walking my dog and I'm thinking about something, I got a bill to pay and I got this, and then I'm like, like I'm even yelling at my own thoughts. I don't have time for that. Like, it's, so I think a lot of it flows out of that, of just like, "Hey, let's just see what these thoughts come up, and hey, no pressure. You're just here to put somebody to sleep. You're not like I." And it's amazing how many times I have to remind myself of that. "Hey, this isn't. We're not solving any major issues in the world. This isn't this isn't the smart podcast, the smart sleep podcast or something. It's a podcast to put people to sleep, you just got to do your best." And it's funny if you would have interviewed me about this like 5 years ago, I said, and it doesn't quite translate to my personal life, but I've seen as I've persisted and kind of tried to be like, well, why isn't this work? Like, can I apply this to my personal life? That has become more and more applicable, to be like, hey, let's try to carry some of these lessons over to our daytime too. And that's just another, I think, magic that kind of feeds the podcast. I think.
Has I guess I should ask, by the time that you began the podcast, do you feel like your own sleep habits had gotten under control? Is insomnia or sleep struggling something that you currently or have struggled with throughout the duration of doing the show?
So let's see. There's like so when I first started the podcast, like I got sober a little bit after that. So then my sleep was terrible because I
Oh,
used alcohol as sleep was one of the perks that alcohol did for me. I mean, it wasn't a sustainable perk, but it and so then it took me a while to kind of get back to that. And then I don't consume a lot of sleep research, but it comes my way, right? And I've established a pretty solid bedtime routine that I stick to most of the time, but so I don't have, like, ongoing insomnia, but I probably only sleep good 70 if I'm over, like, 60 or 70% of the time, then I'm in good shape because,
mm,
um and it is baffling, and part of me is like, in a weird way grateful, because it's like it might be overthinking sometimes, or it might be something physical, or it might be something emotional, and then other times it's just baffling, and it's like and I still can go to that place that you described earlier where it's like, I'm on the edge. Like, within 2 hours, I've gone from, like, having a nice wind down routine and watching a nice show to being on literally
yeah.
the closest to the edge, and that my life has lost all
Yeah.
meaning and sense. And, and then it's like, okay, let me use these tools I talk about on the podcast or whatever to bring me back. But it is like, so sleep is still, I struggle with it less. I guess it's the one thing I've learned from the show and hearing from listeners and talking to people like you is like, hey, okay, you like I invented this. It hasn't gone widestream during the pandemic. I called it hashtag laying, where I would just lay in bed. And it was like, okay, we're just gonna lay here, man, because we're not gonna go to sleep, or I'd wake up at like 4 in the morning and I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. It's like, we're just gonna lay here. Let's just lay here, and that's what we're gonna
Hashtag
do. Kind of like
laying.
on the podcast, and it's like, just lay here. Don't worry about it. And sometimes I'll fall back asleep, and sometimes I'd be like, "Okay, I'm sick of laying here. Let me go do something."
And
But
there
yeah,
are
it's like,
there are studies from people that talk about how maybe you shouldn't. I mean, there's cognitive behavioral therapy on this about how maybe you shouldn't lay down, maybe don't hashtag lay unless you're getting to sleep. But I'm sure you've bounced in and out of all these different theories on what works and what doesn't. Do you feel like diving a little bit into just give us a little overview of your routine and what has worked for you? Like you're describing your night routine?
Sure. I mean, I always like want to say up front, like this isn't prescriptive in the sense
Yeah.
of like we talked about at the beginning. Like a lot of times this stuff feels very onerous and full of shoulds and full of that. And I think it like for me, and this is what I kind of talk about on the show is like the key to having a bedtime routine is kind of that accountability or deliberateness, but also just making it nice. Like so in a perfect world, my bedtime routine would be an hour and a half before I wanna go to sleep, I'm starting to, like, prepare for sleep, like, so it's like I'm getting ready for bed and shutting off, like, I'll still use a screen, I mean, although if I was following some onerous rule, I wouldn't even use a screen,
Right.
and then for me, I, like, do some, like, meditation, some, like, writing, and then I do well, it's really I do like foam rolling or whatever, like stretching type stuff, and then I'll read fiction. And if I do that, pet my dog, walk my dog, get ready for bed, that kind of stuff. But if I do those kind of things, I mean, some of it's stuff that's nice. It's like sitting, especially when the weather's nice, sitting outside at night and journaling or meditating or reading a nice book. It's nice and I look forward to it. So it's like either way, I kind of
Hmm.
am having a win. And then if I can't fall asleep, it's like, oh well, I could read more. Or it's like, okay, well, I know I kind of did the things I needed to do. So it's kind of out of my control at this point, and that's a bummer.
We've got questions coming in. I love what you're saying. I try to do the same thing, and I also am a fiction before bed guy. So there's something about that really hits with me. I have a Steam Deck, and I play visual novels. So like I'm reading, but it is on a screen, and there's a story, and that seems to be working for me most of the time. Chad, if you've got a question for Drew, aka Scooter, as it relates to sleep or insomnia or sleep struggles or the podcast itself, now is the time to ask them. I see I have a handful here. Um, X21 asks, this might sound overly simple, but in your opinion, what's needed for the body to actually fall asleep? Is there a physiology that you know of sleeping that listening taps into?
That I know of, no. But, like, my experience is like, that, like, in the most frustrating thing about it is, like, so we need food and water and sleep to survive, right? And oxygen. And, like, in the Western world, we're pretty lucky to for a lot of people, not everybody has those things access to those things, and it's under their control, but a lot of people do. But when it comes to sleep, it's the one thing if you have access to food, water, and oxygen, you can't just have a sleep. Like, it's like, "Okay, I'm gonna have a glass of sleep and go to sleep." It it's like this one thing that's necessary for our overall well-being and our physical and mental health, and it's like, I don't know. It's so frustrating
Yeah.
to be but I found it's like, as soon as you take your mind off of trying to fall asleep, you're about 90% more likely to fall
Yes.
asleep than think
Yes,
sleeping.
and that's what your podcast, I think, has done for me so phenomenally. We've got another question from Dead a Dragon who says, I panic just by thinking about going to bed, so I procrastinate it for days sometimes without sleeping. Do you think the podcast can help with that?
Yeah, so I can say I really relate to the dread, and when I was a kid, I can remember getting sick to my stomach on, like, Friday night, knowing I was gonna not be able to sleep on Sunday, and then, like, starting to enjoy my Saturday, and then that thing tapping me on the shoulder and being like, "Just you wait, Sunday's coming, you'll never
Yeah,
sleep."
God.
So I relate to that. I think, like, the podcast or, anything, as long as you have something that's for you at bedtime, and I think that is part of the struggle. I mean, not just with sleep for me, but kinda like you're saying is, like, that there's these weird things for me that get in the way of what's good for me or what I enjoy, and it is trying to create also a structure to do that, and it's kinda hard to find the balance between not to fall into the all or nothing trap, but also be like, "Hey, at 8:30, we're gonna start to get ready for bed," or, "At 10:30, we're gonna shut off our screens and get ready for bed," without it feeling like an order coming in from some authority figure,
Yeah.
but also sticking to it.
I wonder how often those guards are the ones showing up in those twilight hours. Like when I hear thoughts about like, because that's how I feel. If you don't go to sleep right now, you're not going to be able to do your job tomorrow. You're not going to be able to get your gym time in, your run, your whole routine is going to be screwed. And it almost feels like there is like a misguided defense mechanism trying to happen there in the late hours of the night. Like, but it's with the same invalidation as our parents might have given us when we were kids. It's like the guard is saying, dude, you better go to sleep right now if you know what's good for you. And it's like, gee, I know, trust me, I know, you know? And I wonder if there's a way to also negotiate with those entities, those guards during the day about sleep. I think you've given me a lot to think about on a metaphorical level.
Cool, cool.
Mighty Narwhal is coming in asking, when did you reach the point that you felt comfortable sharing that you created the podcast? Because you mentioned not wanting people to know. When did you reach the point that you were comfortable?
Wow. So this is a really personal story, and it's my mom. She just passed this past year, and she's had health struggles like most of my adult life. And after a few months of listening to the podcast, she was had an extended stay in the hospital, and I talked to her, and I'm like, "Well, what's going on?" And she's like, "Well, the worst part is I can't sleep, like because it's so noisy here, and this, and this." And it just again, we talk about this like, I'm talking about this like idea of softening or letting my guard down or relaxing. And that I was like, how could you? Some part of me was just like, how could you not tell your mom about the podcast? Maybe it'll help her. Like, are you so like closed off and protective that you're not going to tell her about it? Because what if it helps her out? And I told her, I said, hey, mom, I started this podcast a couple months ago. Maybe you could test it out and see, if it helps you in the hospital. And it did. And that like kind of broke that spell of like, why would you keep this secret if it's like like again, what are you really embarrassed about? This podcast is pretty like when my close friends from childhood have heard the podcast and they haven't talked to me and like, whatever I haven't, they're like, oh, that sounds like, or they're like, no, I had the real world version of that, so I don't need to listen. So it's like, it's not like it's very aligned with my personality. And it's like, why would you hide that then for protection? But I mean, that's just how we're wired, a lot of us.
Do you find that looking back, like as you're looking back at your childhood self, the way you did in the beginning of this interview, do you ever stop and just think about how fascinating it is that that kid is probably so like this, what you're doing is probably like the personification of the dreams that you were having. And like so much of the middle of our, in our 20s for me, 30s and stuff is like about tricking all the guards so that you can get back to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Like I think of 2 things. Like, one, if I had a time machine and I went back to that bedroom where the kid couldn't sleep, and I told the kid, and even if I was in a bad mood and I said, "These are all the hard things. Oh man, this is so blah blah." Like the kid would be like, "Wait a second, what? We like make up stories? You just make up stories? And what are some of the stories? Oh my gosh, that sounds so awful, awful. I mean, awesome. Like I can't believe this. Like this is our like yeah." The kid would be like, "I can't wait." Um, and the other thing is through like kind of like my imagination, I've been like, man, if I had a time machine and I wasn't gonna go back in time to tell the kid about the podcast, it's not like I could have done that much better than the adults in my life, like, other than being like kinda go back to what you said at the beginning, like, "Hey, I see you can't sleep. I'll just sit here with you because like, you're still go unfortunately, you're still gonna have to go to school tomorrow, and I can try to help you with that, and we could try to get to the bottom of what's happening, but for tonight, like, I can just sit with you and I can't promise you you're not gonna have to face school tomorrow. I'm sorry, that's really difficult, and I'm gonna try to figure out what else we can do, but for the time being, the best I can do is just be here." And I think that's another underlying thing of the podcast is, like, my job is just to be here, like, and a friend in the deep dark night, or even though it's like this weird indirect pseudo thing, it's real. I mean, we're seeing it right between the 2 of us now.
First of all, I think you're fantastic and you're just such an incredible conversation. And I'm very, very grateful that you're here. Before we even wrap up, I have to just tell you that your work and you show in your character and in your words how important this is to you. And I can feel it, in therapy. It's the same thing. I learned in my social work schooling, really, that being a social worker is not so much about solving people's problems, at least not in that one-on-one therapeutic setting. Sometimes the best thing we can do is sit there with our clients, sit there with our friends who need help, sit there just alongside, just to be there. And that's definitely that feeling of validation that brings it all full circle that I get when I listen to Sleep With Me, because you're not sitting there rattling off, here's a way to try to sleep and try this. And did you get your milk? And did you do? That's not what it is at all. You're just a friend in the deep, dark night. And you've been that to me and so many others without, you know, uh, being anywhere but where you are. We've got one more question from Darth Maul saying, I have a bad habit of being on electronics right before bed. I watch TV so I can calm myself down. Right before I actually go to sleep, I check my phone because I feel like I'm missing news on social media. Any tips or tricks on how to not do this? And I'll also add to that, is that something you've heard from Sleep With Me listeners, that the increasing amount of social media and scrolling has played a part in people's insomnia?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I would say it's a really difficult thing to deal with, like, and it does get in the way of most people's sleep, but it is quite the conundrum to kinda try to figure out and face because all we have instant access to our friends and what's going on, like, all this stuff and all this news, and we live in a world like, I always think about it, like, and this is, like, where I get pushback from some people on the show, it's like, Sleep With Me is not a separate place. It's like a part of the world, like, it exists within the world, within the chaos. While it, like, maybe a distraction from the chaos, it's not a place we go outside of the chaos, it's, like, imperfect, and it's a part of that, and I think it is like trying to I mean, for me, it always circles back to what's really difficult, and the difficult for me is like saying, "Hey, you're important to me. Your sleep is important to me." Like having that conversation with yourself and like, what are the steps we need to take, or what are the ways we're going to do it to not do that, and acknowledging like, "Hey, is this really affecting my sleep, and do I want to change? Like, can I foster that caring to take those actions, and that takes a lot of practice. I mean, it's harder than being mean to yourself in some
Yeah.
sense. It's way easier to be mean, but it's like those kind of things. I found that that's where the real change comes from, but it is a lot of work and it is really difficult. Like, in fact, I'm trying to be on a mostly news fast for the past week, and I'm not succeeding, like in general. So yeah, it's difficult for
All right.
sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's things we talk about phones a lot on Cartoon Therapy. We talk lately, especially about the ways that, like, I was just saying on Tuesday, I'm trying to make my phone and the screens in my life, I'm trying to just insert consciousness into it. I think like they can be our little friends. My phone can be my little buddy. But when I'm spending all my time scrolling through news things and things that are affecting my nervous system, it starts to feel like it's my enemy that I can't look away from. Uh, and I will continue to talk about that here on Cartoon Therapy. If I think we could have a couple minutes for a few last questions. If anyone has anything, I want to say that after the interview concludes, I'll be doing a giveaway. Thanks to you, with some links for Sleep With Me Plus. I was explaining what that is a little bit at the top of the show, but I want to give you a minute to say, what is the difference between Sleep With Me, the podcast, and Sleep With Me Plus?
Movie Plus is like kind of for super listeners. Like, I mean, it doesn't have ads, and it has like other kind of like what I've learned about the show is like it have only learned this over the past couple of years. Is like there's people that kind of come to the show while they're going through one hard time, right? Like they can't sleep because they're going through something or dealing with something or some kind of change or something they're anticipating. And then there's people that like the shows like kind of an ongoing part of their life, and for those people, some people develop very specific preferences around the show, and they have strong feelings about it, like, and it's surprising how strong those feelings could be. And so we've just like I've like always built our memberships around, oh, I know there's like this percentage of the audience that's not the majority that really likes to consume the show this way, and so we've kind of built it like that, but it's a cool way to like check out all sorts of stuff. And I do have one more surprise for you, which was like I was so touched by your wanting to do the giveaways and figure it out that I want to gift you a like lifetime Sleep With Me
Oh
Plus
my
membership.
God, get the heck
It's
out
like
of here.
yeah, yeah.
What? Okay. That's incredible. Wow. I got a freaking chill on that. Thank you so much. That's so kind of
Because
you.
you're just your audience knows you're like offering to like get all these giveaways are real, and you're really putting yourself out there. And I was like, man, like no one does like that's very rare. So I was really touched, like impressed.
Mel Sunflower says I bursted out crying. I can't. I'm right about there for the second time in this interview. I can't. I have to say, and maybe we'll wrap it up with this. I hope here I'll form it like a question. Do you and does the child in you that was looking for that validation feel? Do you let it hit your heart? Do you feel it that you've provided that validation now for, yeah, I mean, who knows how many people on a nightly basis? Do you let that hit your heart and impact you, the intensity and the seriousness of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it really I'm really like touched. I'm like doing my best to hold it together because like when I connect with somebody that the podcast has impacted and they're curious like you are and then relating it to kind of your own interests and stuff like that, it like goes back to that same thing we're talking about. It's like, how wrong could I have been? Like, what if I just turned my back on that part of me and was like, "Nope, your idea really is dumb. Don't bother. Like, don't bother, man." Like that, that's and that we all kinda have those moments, and it's okay we miss some of them. Like, we don't have to be perfect, but it's like those moments are out there, and it doesn't have to be creative stuff either to just be like, "Hey, okay, let me listen," kinda like you said, "Oh, you got this idea? It sounds pretty wild. Why don't you try to do it and see what happens?"
Yeah. Gosh. Everybody is like throwing hearts and ahs and teary eyes and stuff in the chat. Can we get some love? Can we get some hearts in the chat for Drew Ackerman, aka Scooter? We've got sleepwithmepodcast.com, I believe, sticky linked at the top of the chat there. I cannot encourage cartoon therapy audience folks, Cartoonia. You guys, I can't encourage you enough to get in there if you're struggling with sleep, or even if you're not and you want to laugh and you want some camaraderie. I co-sign Sleep With Me like you would not believe. I'm so grateful to you for being here with us today. If I would love to talk more in the future. I think there it's what I'm getting is like we have a whole world of stuff that we could talk about. If you'd ever want to return, you're welcome anytime. Is there anything more you want us to know, or anything we can help you plug or get behind as we go forward?
No, I mean, thank you I'm definitely would love to stay connected for sure. And yeah, I mean, I think, like, my message has kind of been the same the whole time. It's like this stuff is hard, whether it's sleep or creating stuff or all these things like with mental health and physical health and all those things. And it's like um, a lot of us are wired in a way that that's not additive and not caring for ourselves. And I think like that's where a lot of it can start. Is just like even if it's just that's where the crack of the door happened for me. And the sneaking past the guard was like that those times where I was just like, "Oh, yeah, I do care about your idea. Why don't you tell it to me now before they hear us and they come after us and shut it down. Tell me your idea." And then trying to like, I mean, in a sense, like be a self-parent or whatever and be like, "Oh, okay, let me help you with this, or let me create the structure you need to get this done." But the first step is just that self-validation, being like, "Yeah, you're worthy of my attention."
That goes for everybody. I hope you let those words sink in. I know it does for Dead a Dragon, who just commented and said, I just want to say thank you. And I realize now that I'm not being a good friend to myself, not allowing myself to let my guard down and sleep. Sleep with me will be my friend from now on that will help me take care of me. Does that sound like a good way of thinking? I will say it does to me. Drew, thank you so much for being here. We're going to do the giveaways after we conclude here, which we're wrapped up. Thank you, everybody, for your attentiveness. Thanks for all the hearts and love in the chat. Thank you so much for the freaking gift. I really didn't expect that at all. I'll send you an email. It's going to be kind of an abrupt ending, but I'll get back up with you an email after the show. Thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thanks everybody for having me, and I look forward to connecting. And I guess I have to hang up on you because I'm the one who called you, so I'll hang up.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll
Everyone's
see you.
saying thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All
Oh
right,
my
buddy. Thanks.
gosh. Oh my God. I have tears in my freaking eyes, dude.